Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around I'm playing as the Skaven against the Lizardmen led by ODM, MMM, JTM on the map, the Twisted Glade. And granted this does look a fair bit like my previous Vanguard builds, and I know I've been doing a lot of Skaven. This will probably be the last Skaven video for at least a little while, I hope. But I wanted to get I've been trying to, because I feel that Skaven are really kind of one of the most difficult factions to get into. I've been trying out different builds with them. I just trying to demonstrate things that can work in quick match to help any of you who might be struggling with them, as I did when I started out, to kind of do better with them. And I think they're definitely the most challenging faction to kind of wrap your head around. So hopefully this will be another kind of composition that can give you guys some ideas. So without further ado, let's jump into things. So things do develop fairly slowly. As you can see, this comp is incredibly heavy on shooting. I actually and I've been very fond of this lately when I play Skaven, just massing range fire. Now Skaven range fire on the surface does not look good at all. Very low damage per hit, low armor piercing damage. At that, it's not even armor piercing. You either have to do short range, low ammo count, and 360 fire, or you have to do long range but sacrifice firing on the move and lose 360 degree fire, and your range still isn't very good. But Skaven range do have a few advantages built in for sure, and so I kind of wanted to. I've been using them a lot more in more of my comps. Now, what I did here was I did bring Queek. I think Queek is generally the best pick as far as lords go, simply because he does have stand your ground. He has decent combat stats, but when you're trying to combo with a ranged heavy build, he has the advantage of warp shard armor, which debuffs enemy armor, and you need to debuff enemy armor to make your slingers more effective. Now, my front line here is, honestly, if you are trying to do a ranged heavy Skaven build, slingers are a must. You cannot rely on globadiers, you can't rely on bombardiers, as fancy as those units may seem. They're simply too inaccurate, too unreliable to really get much done. Slingers, in my opinion, are where it's at. Whether even from the lowest Skaven slave slingers right up to the night runners and gutter runners with poison. So Queek with warp shard armor is a very solid pick, I think, just for supporting this sort of build. He's also pretty survivalist by Skaven standards, especially against non-armor piercing troops, but even against armor piercing, because his decent melee stats, he's fairly tanky, and of course he can hit, but well above his weight class, really. For my front line here, I did decide to use Skaven slaves. These guys are simply with spears. For most part, I couldn't afford all four, so there's one normal unit of Skaven slaves. These guys are simply there to absorb the enemy charge, soak up hits, perhaps do a little extra damage to large targets, what little they can do. These guys are not there to do damage, they're there to soak up damage. Or they're there to soak up hits. Behind that is my debuffing contingent. I have 2 units of Plague Monks. These guys are there mostly to tear through light infantry, like, say, Skinks. And then 2 units of Death Runners, and these guys are there to really cast debuffs, because Weeping Blade is an amazing ability, and when you're running this many Gutter Runners or Death Runners, it is what you want to be bringing for sure. These guys, of course, cause armor piercing, so they'll do a respectable amount of damage on their own. And they have a melee attack debuff. Their melee attack debuffs enemies by 50%, or debuffs enemy armor by 50%. Which is huge. It means that, especially when stacked on top of warp shard armor, since those debuffs do stack, you can make enemies completely vulnerable to your fire. Finally, for my range contingent here, I have 6 units of Death Runners with slings, or sorry, Night Runners with slings, and then 4 units of Gutter Runner slingers with poison. And it's important to remember that while these guys actually have a very respectable amount of ammo, and if push comes to shove, because of the built-in 30% physical resist, especially against a faction without much magic damage like Lizardmen, and because they have respectable melee, well, decent melee stats, comparable to, say, Skinks, who are really the only unit that can catch them, these guys can actually perform okay, if not amazingly well, in close quarters. And actually, Gutter Runners will perform very well, actually, in melee combat by most standards, or definitely by when all things are considered. And these guys do have a 90 model count, so these guys can definitely dish out a lot of hurt. And with the poison, that's further debuffs. This is a very debuff-heavy army, and I think this is really the way you want to go, unless you're going for sort of a monster-heavy build like what I demonstrated last time. My opponent in this situation went very monster-heavy. This is fairly popular from what I've been seeing with Lizardmen. There's really 2 builds that I've been seeing a lot of. A mix of skirmishers and monsters, and a mix of Temple Guard and Skinks. Those are really the 2 things you will see a lot of. Saurus Warriors are not that popular with Pig, and they're Pterodon Riders and that sort of stuff, though of course Slingers will absolutely tear through. So I'm doing here, I'm kind of drawing up my lines, getting ready to poke away at my opponent. I don't want to push in just yet. Bring up my infantry. My opponent knows that I have a lot of shooting. He's being cautious. The 30% physical resist on the Night Runners and Gutter Runners is huge when resisting enemy ranged fire. Makes your units honestly tankier than than the majority of enemy ranged troops. Maybe elves with their shields are probably the only comparably survivable unit. And I guess chameleon skinks, because they do have that built-in 40% range resist. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to set up an encirclement. My opponent is trying to sort of posture out with these king skirmishers who are still hidden in the woods. I'm pushing the Skaven slaves up to the front just to absorb hits. Behind them will be the plague monks and the death runners, who are just kind of spread out to be meat shield. You can see the skinks are definitely kind of doing quite a bit of hurt because there's trees in the way. The slingers aren't going to do too much to them, but that's okay. You can see here there's huge volleys come in, and they're actually doing very little to these chameleon skinks. Because chameleon skinks have 40% damage resist against range. Stack on top of that the fact that they're in woods, and these guys are doing very, very well. Or very, very poorly, sorry. Certainly not well. But as you can see, once they start breaking the tree cover, trying to get shots, they definitely start taking a bit of hurt. Now, as my opponent does push in with his Crocsgores and the Skink Chiefs, and he actually has Crocar hidden here. Interestingly enough, he mounted him on a cold one, I think. Perhaps a horned one, I'm not entirely sure. But I do charge in to meet these Crocsgores. And I'm going to focus fire these heavy troops. You can completely ignore... If chameleon skinks attempt to engage you in melee, if skink units try to engage you in melee, especially death or gutter runners will simply win, because there's more of them. They're actually, I do believe, tankier or about the same tankiness. And you can see with the debuffs come in from Weeping Blade and Queek with the 18 armor. These guys are getting dropped to 32 armor over here, and that is huge. You can see they're going to rampage shortly thereafter. They're going to fear out. Now you can see some of my Skaven slaves are terror routing, but that's okay. They're Skaven slaves. They're irrelevant. You can see the Crocsgores aren't bleeding too many models, but they're falling apart. My opponent does focus Queek. He charges in with Crocar, but of course Crocar is going to be knocking him around. The Plague Monks are completely immune to psychology as long as Frenzy is up, so I don't have to worry about sudden terror routes from the Skink Chief, though it's definitely doing quite a bit of work to these Plague Monks. And these are the shotgun-esque Skink Chiefs with the wide arc battery of crossbows, I guess. And you can see I'm finally losing Frenzy, I do believe, but it's okay. You can see these guys are just getting debuffed, and their armor's dropping through the floor, and they're just getting focused down by these gutter runners. You can see this, these chameleon skinks are just not killing enough. They've killed 16, now 17 models in this one unit of gutter runners, and in the meantime I've got all of these units of night runners and gutter runners just firing away, firing their shots, just being a pain in the rear. You can actually see the Skaven slaves are still pursuing and just keeping these chameleon skinks on the run. My opponent probably had them in skirmish mode. I just ignore these guys. I'm so completely focused on just shutting down this ranged fire. The melee units. And you can see Queek is more than alive at this point, being blobbed up. You can see some of my infantry definitely doing some nasty hits. The Plague Monks are really badly mauled, but at this point my opponent is in a situation where he cannot do anything further. His melee contingent is completely wiped, and he does withdraw from the game at this point, as I start chasing after his chameleon skinks. So it's really, I think, a wombo with Skaven. You're very reliant. Now, I'm still holding out hope. I'm hoping that in a future, either DLC or patch, we get Warp Block Jezzails. That is my sincere hope with Skaven, because I think that would definitely level the playing field for him. At least it would make him less debuff reliant. Right now, I don't really think your top tier, the Skaven, you don't necessarily want to bring, in my opinion, Stormvermin, because their morale is very low and they have no immunity to psychology. They're very susceptible to just getting kind of swept off the field. And I think Clan Rats are often kind of just overpriced for what they do. So I think definitely the combo of Skaven Slaves, Plague Monks, and Death Runners is probably the ideal trio for if you're bringing melee infantry. Just pick one depending on what function you want them to serve. And I definitely think that Slingers are the way to go. Max out on Night Runner if you're going for a very ranged contingent. And ranged stuff, you gotta keep in mind the Skaven ranged is not terrible in melee. They're not amazing. They're not gonna win against most melee units, but they can hold their own for long enough. If you have several of them near each other, they can support each other and just tag team enemies. I've had Night Runners actually beat down Silverhelms in close quarters, because my opponent was not able to retreat them. So that sort of stuff. So they definitely don't underestimate Skaven ranged fire. Their stats look terrible on paper, so you have to work around it. Now, potentially what you could do is you could also bring a Plague Monk with the armor debuff to drop any armor even further. You could basically drop Crocsgore's armor with between Queek, Death Runners, and the Plague Monk down to 2 armor value, which would make him practically incapable of just really. And because you're able to field so much range fire, there's 90 models, each is firing away. The damage stacks up very quickly, and with poison applied from... I definitely think you should try to bring a few Gutter Runner Slingers with poison every time, even if you focus largely on Night Runners, just because the poison debuff's useful. And I think it's definitely a solid sort of setup. Otherwise, your other option is really to go for that sort of Doomwheel, Screaming Bell, Plague Furnace type build, which I think is also it's very functional, but I think that's the alternative. I think that's where Skaven currently are. I definitely hope that if we get Warplock Jezzails and Rattling Guns, Skaven will finally have a functional normal Skaven build, I guess, with like more generic Skaven units, not really relying on their special units or that sort of stuff. But until then, I definitely think this is one of the better builds. You can see the losses. Very one-sided. The Sking Chiefs just kind of rampaged through my infantry. They tore through the Death Runners, tore through the Plague Monks, tore through the... Well, they completely routed out the Skaven slaves. But it does, but the losses definitely don't tell the whole story, because the majority of the losses here were the Croxagores, and the Sking Chiefs actually didn't die. So my opponent, while he definitely didn't take too heavy losses, his losses weren't too heavy. There was all of it was his high-value targets, and so whatever he had left on the field was simply not going to be able to put down all of these units before they themselves would just get swamped and beaten down in close quarters. So yeah, I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully it is the last Skaven for a while. I know I've been doing a lot of Skaven, but I'm hoping that if you guys do quick match, that this helps you guys out a bit and gives you some inspiration. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about Warhammer 2 or Total War Warhammer 1, and any recommendations for units or compositions you've seen that you would like me to test or anything like that, and crafting or whatever, be sure to post this out in the comments. I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Wyvern out.